Power, the perpetual struggle. Power is not an option. We're affected by power. We're all affected by power struggles, even if we ourselves aren't actually involved in that struggle. As a result of those power struggles, we can be beneficiaries or we can be victims. Good example is when a country goes for an election, whichever party wins the power is going to affect us one way or the other. In some instances, that party will benefit us. In other instances, it won't. So power is not something we can ignore. We have to face it. We have to address it. Very important if you're going to develop as an individual and you're going to develop an organisation, that you understand what power is. You understand how to obtain power, how to manage power, how to retain power, and to understand what the routes to power are. Because if you don't understand the routes to power, you can't gain power. So let's look at the first piece of information we need. What is power? Power is the ability to influence people despite their wishes. The ability to influence people despite their wishes. It's not authority. Authority is a name on the door. You might be a CEO. You've got authority. Doesn't necessarily mean you have power. History is littered with monarchs who, yes, had the title of king, queen, even emperor, but the power was behind the throne. So it's very important to understand, do you have power? If you don't have power, do you need power? Now, the thing to remember is you have a choice. During your waking hours, you can decide to be powerless in a situation or powerful. You have a choice. In some situations, you may not want power. You may not need power. You can choose. The important thing is to understand, how do I get that power? There are 5 routes to power. There's hard coercive, which is based on fear. There's soft coercive, which is based on division, seduction. There's asset power. This is having something another party or other parties want. There's doctrinal power, which is built on principles. Doctrinal power, like the church, used to be very powerful, based on a principle. And finally, relationship power. Now, when one's looking to gain power, manage power and retain it, one has to look very carefully at which elements of the mix you use. For example, coercive power is usually short-lived. If people don't stay in a position of fear for very long. And secondly, divisive power becomes very obvious after a short space of time. So we need much more cement to retain power. And this is relationship power. Let's look at some examples. One could argue that the reason Brexit happened and Donald Trump winning America was because the politicians had lost the trust of the people. They did not have the relationship power. In order to try and retain their power, they were starting to use coercive power in both forms. Even if they tried to declare they had assets that the people wanted, because they didn't have the relationship power, the people didn't trust them. It's a very good example if you look at the way empires break up. It's because the trust is lost. So a very key element in retaining power, maintaining power, is to develop the relationship power. As we said, we have a choice. In any situation, we can elect to be powerful or powerless. But in order to influence people, despite their wishes, we need to understand the people, the individual, the groups we're dealing with. In the International Institute of Humanization, we call it the internal landscape. How does their brain work? What motivates them? What makes them fearful? What demotivates them? We need to understand this so we can apply the appropriate route to power. If someone is not going to be fearful, coercion won't work with them. In fact, it will have the opposite effect. It will diminish power. Therefore, we need to understand these people. What creates their internal landscape? the way they were brought up, their education, the environment they live in, their culture, their faith. So the first stage in selecting the route to power is to understand the internal landscape of the group or people we're dealing with. Let us consider two historical characters, Machiavelli and Genghis Khan. Both very powerful people, different reasons. They both had similar aims, but they chose different routes to power. The reason being, they chose the appropriate route to power, and because they chose correctly, they gained power. Let's, for example, look at Machiavelli. The prince. The prince had a problem. He was surrounded by powerful people. He had to play a very careful balancing game. And he did that by combining asset power with relationship power to play one very powerful neighbour off against another. And he also used a fundamental principle. He never went on the side of the strongest. He always went on the side of the weakness, so he was the balancing power. In fact, British government policy in foreign policy in Europe was always to go on the side of the weaker of the two most powerful nations, France and Germany, never on the side of the most powerful. The reason being, if they gained their power because you'd had the balance of power, they would then turn on you. So there we had an asset form of power and a relationship form of power. Now Genghis Khan, very different. His main source of power was coercion. But he recognised something else. He was an exile from his tribe. And in the Mongol society, people were made exiles from the tribe. They used to wander the steppes alone. There were quite a large number of these people. Genghis Khan recognised that. So he started using relationship power by bringing all those exiled people together under one umbrella, one single tribe. They'd now got power. And then they started to exploit that joint power. It was coercive power. The lesson is, when you're looking to gain power, to consider which is the best route, which is the most appropriate route for what we're trying to achieve. It won't necessarily always be the same. If you've ever worked in an environment where the boss, his only source of power, or the only way he tries to get power, is coercion, it doesn't last very long. Good people don't put up with it, they go. The other people will live in fear, but will only tell that person what they think he wants to hear or she wants to hear. Who suffers in the end? The person who thinks they can get power by fear is using the inappropriate power source. When we're seeking to gain power and to obtain power, we need to be selective. Let's look at examples. Let's take, for example, the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church was formed by the Romans, the Roman Empire. Why? Why did Augustus convert to Christianity? He converted to Christianity for political reasons. He saw an opportunity to gain power through doctrine, through principles, through rules, and also a way to retain power. And for over 2,000 years, the church was a very powerful organisation within the whole of the Western world. It still has power today? Not so much. It's lost touch with the people. Because of instances that happened in the church, they're losing their relationship power. Let's take, for example, Napoleon Bonaparte. What was his route to power? Two: coercion and also relationship power. He gained an enormous amount of trust from the French army because he was a very capable soldier, very capable leader, and they trusted him. And he used coercive power to deal with his enemies. But it was all based on the power base with the relationship with the army. They had a client, the CEO of a railway company in Britain. Now, the CEOs of railway companies have quite a difficult job to do. They have to gain power, but they have to be very selective in the route they choose to power, because they're managing with very powerful trade unions. And if they misuse their power, they're likely to create more harm than good. So coercive power is only used as a last resort. They work very hard to develop the relationship power with their people and the trade unions. So the message is, if you're going to gain power, if you're going to maintain power, you have to think through very carefully which is the most appropriate route and which is going to be the most enduring. Very rarely is it a single route. To sum up, power is a fact of life. Power struggles are going on all the time, even during our sleeping hours. Power struggles that we could be beneficiary of or even a victim of. It's important to understand that if we're going to develop our full potential, we have to understand power. How to obtain it, how to apply it, how to retain it. Power is never given. Power is seized. We need to understand the 5 routes to power and how to use them appropriately. Hopefully we've given you food for thought, but if you're going to fully develop your potential, you really do need to understand this subject in some detail. Thank you.